Okay, everybody, welcome back. So now what we're going to do is let's go through your contract with your seller or owner of record. That's a term that you'll hear quite a bit from, especially from title companies and attorneys. So, again, standard real estate purchase agreement. We don't want anyone to feel like there is anything out of the ordinary about our contract. So, let's start from the top and work our way to the bottom. So, that first thing is I'm going to go through so you understand what the contract says. And then when we're done, I'll go through it the way that I explained it to a seller. So, just super important for you to understand every line, what it means, and how it, affects the transaction. Right. So standard purchase or standard real estate purchase agreement. This agreement is made on. So this is the date. So let's say December 1st, 2021. Right, by and between. So owner of record or the seller, or which should be the same person. Um, what is important here is when you're talking to the seller. Usually, your first conversation is over the phone, is to look and make sure that this person actually is the owner or that they have the right and ability to sell the property, because you don't want to spend a week or 2 weeks or a month following up with somebody who is a tenant or an heir who does not have the ability to sign on the dotted line and make this happen. So what you can do is, when Mrs. Smith calls you the first time, you can open up a screen, go to your county's property appraiser site, put in the address, and make sure that the person that you're on the phone with is the person that is listed. Now, there will be some times where that is not the case. First, if it is a company or a trust selling it to you, and you look it up and it says, the Banana Street LLC. Great. Hey, Mrs. Smith. So this looks like it's titled in the Banana Street LLC. Are you an authorized signer for them? Great. Wonderful. And then just proceed. Or if it's a trust, same question. The only other thing is you may be talking to Mrs. Smith and it may say, um, Granddad Bob Jones is the owner. And you say, hey, Mrs. Smith, are you the owner of the property? Well, it was my grandfather, but he left it to me. Okay. At that point, we can kind of proceed with Mrs. Smith, but we know in the back of our head that there's going to be some title work here that will need to be cleaned up. And that's what you will need to let your transactions company or the title company know so that they can be prepared. And then, if you get the property under contract, then you can dive deeper into that. So, owner of record hereafter called the seller and your entity name. Now, you do not need to go out if you are new and create an LLC or a corporation or any of those things. You should do your first couple of deals probably in your own name, because setting up an LLC is expensive. It costs you a few $100 every year. You're going to have to pay an accountant probably to do your taxes unless you're really smart. I'm not that smart, so I have to pay somebody. But anyways, this is you. Nothing wrong with it being your name, like it could say, and David Olds, hereafter called the buyer, right? And or assigns, that gives you the ability to, as a wholesaler, assign this contract if you would like, or you can close on it yourself. You don't need to take that out. Does not matter. Description of the premises. This is simply your address, right? 123 Main Street, comma, Chattanooga, Tennessee, comma, 37412. Very simple, right? Now, legal description written as follows. So sometimes the property address changes. Maybe 911 came through and renumbered the street. It happens. It's happened to us a few times on properties that we've owned. So, legal description, what we put here is not the full paragraph. You can if you really want to, but normally just the parcel number, the tax ID is good enough here. And what this does is if the title company searches the address and there's something squirrely about it where it doesn't match up, they will double check with the parcel ID and make sure that they are looking at the right property, because that is actually the real designator for this property. Property address is it's not the primary thing, is the legal address or the parcel. In some parts of the country, it's called the APN number. So there are going to be a couple different things. You can find this right on your property appraiser's website, your comping service. Zillow has it, CRS has it, Zillow has it. Everybody has it. Put that in there. That will save any confusion. Sometimes the same seller may own multiple properties on one street, and you want to make sure your title work's being done for the right property. So, purchase price, right? This is very important. This is what Mrs. Smith and I have agreed to purchase her property for. Very simple, nothing out of the ordinary here. Now, if you're working some kind of deal where Mrs. Smith has a mortgage, maybe she owes 36,000 and just wants her mortgage paid off and she wants to walk away, you can put here mortgage payoff amount, right? That's okay. Or maybe it's mortgage payoff plus $1,000, right? So you can be a little bit creative here, but understand this. All contracts are simply just a recipe or a roadmap for what the title company is going to do, right? That's it. So that's the way you have to look at a purchase agreement. So when this goes to the title company, they're going to look at this and say, huh, okay, what am I doing with this transaction, right? So if it says mortgage payoff, then they'll request a mortgage payoff, and that's what, that's what your purchase price will be as of the date of closing. Now, if you are going to do that, you should know, be really sure that the mortgage payoff is a number that will work for you, especially if you're wholesaling it. So, very simple terms. So let's go through this just a little bit. So, number one, Mrs. Smith, we told you that, I was going to pay for all the closing costs. So number one, closing costs are to be paid in the following fashion. Buyer to pay for a warranty deed, closing fee, and title insurance, right? So these are all of the standard closing costs. Now, seller to pay any cost required to provide clear title and back taxes and or liens. So what that means is if Mrs. Smith owns this property free and clear, she just paid her taxes, she will get the entire $36,000 at closing, minus any like a couple days of taxes, right? But if Mrs. Smith owes $10,000 on a mortgage and $2,000 in city liens and $3,000 in taxes, all of those things will be deducted from her proceeds at closing. So I will tell Mrs. Smith, hey, if you do have back taxes or liens or any mortgages, the good news is you don't have to come out of pocket to pay those before closing. The title company will just do some magic and reduce all of those out of your proceeds. So, they'll take care of everything. It'll be easy peasy. If, let's say in this case, remember Mrs. Smith was the seller and it was still in Grandpa Joe's name, whatever it was, or there are a bunch of siblings that are going to have to sign deeds or whatever the case is, that is the responsibility of the seller. The seller has to provide us with clear title. So if the title company is going to have to do a bunch of documents, research, pull death certificate, any of that stuff, the title company is going to charge you. I want the title company to understand those charges do go to the seller. So I would just want to be super clear. I don't really stress that and go too deep into that. I will simply tell the seller, hey, the title company will take care of clearing the title for you. We'll work with them and you and make sure that this happens. They may have some costs for some of that paperwork, but we'll get it done for you as quick as we can. So again, as a wholesaler, we are in the business of solving problems for people. So that's what that means. Number two, any taxes owed will be appropriately prorated between the parties at closing, right? Very simple. If taxes are $100 per month and you're closing at the end of June, the first 6 months of the year will be credited to the buyer because at the end of the year, the buyer will have to pay the taxes. So I tell Mrs. Smith, I'll pay for all the closing costs. I can't pay for any taxes. I can only pay for them as of the date of closing. So if you have any back taxes or whatever your taxes are for the year, those will come out of your portion at closing. And it's not something you'll have to make a separate payment for. Closing to be set as soon as possible for all parties, but no later than 60 days from fully executed contract date. So let's take that little chunk there. So again, we tell Mrs. Smith we are cash buyers. We are going to close as soon as possible. Where we are at in time right now, the fastest any closing company is getting your paperwork done is about 21 days because the market is a little bit crazy. There's a lot of refis going on. That's mostly the problem because interest rates are low. So we explained to Mrs. Smith, hey, typically we're closing in 21 to 40 days, but we put 60 on here for a couple of reasons. One, if the title company's running behind, I don't want you to worry that on day 31 we're going to walk away from you. So this locks us into you. And I present it more from that point of view, that we are locked into you, not you're locked into us. Um, so you don't want us to change our mind. We're locked into you for 60 days. Also, Mrs. Smith, it could take some time to clear up the paperwork, with grandpa and changing the title. They're going to have to get a hold of some heirs. They're going to have to do some stuff, right? So what this does is this just gives us plenty of time to get through this, and nobody feels like they have to rush. Other things that might cause your closing to be extended out. Maybe there's tenants who are moving out. So you can actually change 60 and put it out to 120 days, 180 days, whatever you and the seller agree to. Maybe the seller needs 90 days to move out. Great. Let's put 120 days on here just to be sure and give everybody plenty of time. So, I wouldn't ever go less than 60 days. You can. I remember, way back when I started 20 years ago, people would put 15 days, 10 days. It was crazy. But that's going to be really hard right now to make sure you can get the transaction done in that amount of time. And what your risk is if you put a lower date just to satisfy the seller, and I've seen this happen with people who do JV deals with us, is they put 30 days on there, day 31 comes, the seller's got another offer and they bounce out on them. So I recommend 60, but again, this will be your contract, so you can do whatever you want to do. It's your business. So seller grants any extensions needed to clear title or complete closing documentation. This very simply will buy you a few extra days and save us the trouble of going to Mrs. Smith and having her sign a bunch of addendums to extend the closing date. So if the title company calls you and says, hey, your contract expires on December 15th, we can't close this until the 19th, we need an addendum. No, we don't. Just look at number 3, seller grants any extensions necessary, and that will solve your problem most of the time. And it also, it's not going to run forever, right? It's not going to give you a year. It's not going to do any of those things. If you have a buyer on this deal and, Mrs. Smith, it's like, hey, our contract's up in 60 days. Yeah, we're closing. It's going to be 62 days. It's not a problem. Our contract grants any small extensions. That will get you through there. But again, it's not going to extend it for 30 or 60 days. That's no judge in the world is going to say it's just an open-ended contract. So that's just there to help us, not have to do a bunch of paperwork. Number 4, property is sold as is with no warranties implied or stated from the seller, right? So of course, Mrs. Smith, we're purchasing the property. It's as is. The only thing we ask is, of course, that it has clear title. So very simple, right? So we want to promote that we're buying it's cash and it's as is. Now, sometimes you will get some questions. Well, why do you need to do an inspection if you're buying it as is? What as is means is that we are not going to require you to make a bunch of repairs, right? However, we do still, Mrs. Smith, want to do an inspection because of something, right? And here's where I will use a story of something that's happened to me, and you can feel free to borrow this story. Hey, Mrs. Smith, I have bought properties and not had at least my contractors come in and do a quick look, and there's been fire damage in the attic that's been very expensive to fix, and the price that we're agreeing on is just based on what I'm seeing here. So, or if you're on the phone and doing this virtual, hey, Mrs. Smith, we're basing this price off of what you're telling me. So of course I'm going to have somebody come over, take some pictures and do a quick walkthrough. So that's sort of how we get past that as is with no warranties implied or stated from the seller. I also will say something like, well, Mrs. Smith, I even if I'm standing in the house, hey, I'm going to have my contractors come back by because, I'm too big to be crawling under the house. I get stuck like Winnie the Pooh in that crawl space. I don't crawl into attics and do stuff like that. I got a real skinny limber guy that I send up into those places. So if you could tell them something like that and it makes them laugh and you laugh, rapport is built and it's strengthened and you will be good. So number 5, closing to be held at. If you're working local and you're working at the same title company all the time, put that in. If you're working virtual and you are working at the same title company all the time, put that in. If you're using, our transactions company, Easy REI Closings, feel free to put that in, and we will handle that for you. But if you have a title company that you work with all the time, put it down, because what will happen, and with their phone number and their contact, because what will happen is the seller may want to call over to Key Title in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and talk to Miss Megan and say, "Hey, Megan, is NPL Investments, are they closing deals? Are they a legitimate company? Are they a scam?" And your contact at the title company said, "Absolutely not. We do a lot of work with them. They're very reliable." So that is the greatest, reassurance that you can give to a seller, is having them call the title company and vouch for you, essentially. So number 6, this contract is contingent on clear title and final acceptance of the property by the buyer or buyer's agent before closing, and that the property is suitable for buyer's needs and plans. So number 6 is why we do not have to have a 14-page contract. It is the thing that will let us out of this contract up until the second the pen touches the paper at closing. So let's break it down. So the contract is contingent, meaning, the contract is cannot move forward unless there's clear title, right? The title company won't close it. We won't buy it if there's not clear title. And a final inspection of the property by the buyer or buyer's agent, which could be our wholesaling partner. So before closing, and that the property is suitable for the buyer's needs and plans. So what that means is basically until 30 seconds before the closing, it gives us the ability to walk away because something is not suitable. Something about the property is not suitable for what we want to do. So this will keep you from getting sued a lot. Buyer has the right to market this property or market this contract. This is sort of very similar to and/or assigns, but it just makes it really clear. So if the buyer happens to see your property posted someplace, "Hey, Mr. Seller, yeah, like I told you in the beginning, we do a bunch of different things with these properties. Sometimes we'll rent them, sometimes we'll fix them up, sometimes we will find a end user that we're going to work with on the property, and other times, we're just marketing the property to see if we can find a tenant," right? So that's all that means, and that's what I would tell them is, if the seller asks you when you're doing the contract, market this contract. Hey, yeah, sometimes we want to look into the future a little bit and make sure that we can find our end buyer once we're done with what we're doing, or rented, something like that. So number 7, if the property is rented, rents will be prorated as of the date of sale, and security deposits will transfer at closing on the settlement statement. Very important. Very, very, very important. If this property is rented, I can tell you why. We had one of our acquisitions people, it was a package of 8 or 9, something like that, maybe 10 mobile homes. And the seller told our acquisitions person that the seller told our acquisitions person that they were not transferring deposits. The acquisitions person did not make note of that, and we sold it to our buyer, and the buyer was expecting those deposits, and we had to come out of pocket for that. So we want to be on notice on the contract so that the seller signs this and is aware that the rents will be prorated as of the date of sale. So if the seller has collected rents for the month and the property is selling on the 15th, when the new buyer closes on the 15th, he is entitled to the rent for half of the month. So there will just be a credit from the seller to the buyer on the closing statement. And security deposit. So let's talk about that. So a security deposit is really the ownership of the tenant. It's just money that they put up, and the landlord or the leaseor holds that in a non-interest-bearing escrow account. And the tenant puts up that money as security that they will leave the property in the condition they found it. So that does not become the property of the landlord or the leaseor until the tenant moves out, and the landlord can verify that those repairs are needed, and then they can deduct that from the security deposit. And if there is anything left, it has to be returned to the tenant. So makes sense that the new buyer down the road, when this tenant moves out, is going to have to walk the property, make any repairs, and deduct that from the security deposit. So that security deposit has to transfer. Every so often, we'll get some sellers that want to give us some grief about it, and we just explain to them, "Hey, that really doesn't belong to you. That belongs to the tenant." And when when we have them move out on us in the future, we are going to, obviously need to give them back their deposit. So, and just kind of as a side note, even though, you know, we are going to wholesale this property, or that may be our intention, where, sometimes we do keep them. We always tell the seller, hey, we act as if, we're going to be the person in that position. Right. Um, so we've talked about the leases and why that's important, or the rent rather, and the security deposit, why that has to transfer on the settlement statement, and all of that will be on the statement. So again, if Mrs. Smith was getting $36,000, the partial month's rent and the security deposits will just transfer on the HUD, the closing statement. So she does not need to worry about bringing checks or anything like that. The second part of this here is the seller to provide all leases and documents within 5 days to the buyer for review. What that is the, of course, the leases, any agreements that she has with, if she's in a long-term contract for cable or lawn cutting or any of those things, that those are provided to us so that we can evaluate that. So all of this is going to be important information when you're marketing and trying to bring in a buyer, because they're going to want to know these things. I promise this is the first thing that the buyer is going to ask about the tenants. How much is the rent? How long is left on their lease? What are the deposits? All of that stuff. So number 8, very important, seller to provide buyer with permission to access the property solely for the purpose of such as evaluation of repairs needed, appraisal of said property, and for securing financing and professional advisement on the resale of property. That's a long sentence. So, Mrs. Smith, again, here's where we can kind of say the same thing that we talked about up top is, I don't crawl into attics. I don't crawl into crawl spaces. I'm sure I'm walking through and I can see everything, but we're just going to have our contractors come through and do a quick review to make sure everything is what I think it is. There's no surprises. They're a little bit smarter than me. And what we're setting the stage for here is, if you're in person, you should be taking the pictures and video right then, right? Because you have a limited number of times that you're going to be able to ask Mrs. Smith for access to the property. And then, so if that's the case, you can say, hey, I'm going to grab my contractors to come by, and, they may measure some countertops, flooring, measure for painting, and, all those types of things. And I explained, Mrs. Smith, here's the thing, we try to move very, very quickly. So as soon as the title work's done, we want to be able to get these guys in here. Really, the next day we'll have a dumpster here, and, anything that we need to do, we're going to get started on it right away. So it's super important for us and for our process to be able to, to get in here before closing so we can have that stuff ready. Because right now, material takes a long time to order. So I hope you understand that. If the property is vacant, same thing. Hey, Mrs. Smith, I need to get a key. What we'll do is I'll put a lockbox on here so that I can send my contractors by to, to get that information to do whatever, right? Or if there's something obvious like a hole in the floor, hey, I'll have them come over and get those quotes for me so that, again, once we close, we are ready to go. And of course, what we're setting the stage for here is to bring our wholesale partners in, and, so that they can walk the property. Specifically for the reasons above. Great. So seller understands buyer may assign this contract to another person, entity, or trust at closing, and lists the contract on MLS or Zillow prior to closing. If this ever comes up, what I explain is, yes, absolutely. Sometimes I do bring in a partner because we do so many deals. I've only got so much of my own money. So sometimes we'll do that. Sometimes we'll close on it ourselves. Sometimes if it has my name at the top, David Olds, I may close this into one of my companies. I have multiple companies. Or we sometimes hold them in a land trust, which just, and you can tell a little story. Hey, here's what a land trust is. It basically just sort of hides me from public record because I don't want my tenants to know who the actual owner is because we have this with a property manager. So, um, that's sort of how we deal with that. If there's ever the question about listing the contract on MLS or is prior to closing, hey, Mrs. Smith, sometimes some sellers will let us come in, we'll do some repairs, and then we'll go ahead and list it, on Zillow for a tenant or possibly to resell. So if you want me to strike that, I can, right? And honestly, we don't list everything on MLS, probably less than 5% of our deals. So if this is something that we have to strike out, it's not the end of the world. But again, 99% of people don't even see it, don't care. They just sign the contract because again, understand what your seller wants. They want relief from this property that's keeping them up at night. So, and we'll talk in just a minute about how we go through and do the contract with the seller. So seller warrants, number 9, seller warrants that they do not know of any city, county, or local government issues or liens on this property which might be pending. Again, here's a story. We sold a property in Chattanooga here to a end user, and they called me up very upset that a couple days after they closed it, the city showed up to knock it down. So that's why this is in here, because the seller did not tell us that they had a knockdown order on the property. So we just want the seller to tell us if they have code enforcement liens or anything like that, because it's our job. We have to be transparent with our end buyer and we have to tell them these things so that they can be prepared. You do not want to make somebody upset and have them call you after they've bought a property from you, because chances are they won't buy another one because they'll feel like you lied to them or bamboozled them. Number 10, any furniture, fixtures, attachments, and debris located in and around the property not removed prior to closing become the ownership of the buyer. What has happened here is we've closed on a property, the buyer's taken possession, and then 2 days later, the previous owner shows up to get the refrigerator, right? You're going to get 2 angry calls from people. You're going to get the seller calling you saying, hey, that was my stuff. I was coming to get it. And the buyer's going to be like, hey, dude, like, we bought this property as is, and like, they can't come get it. And I've had to pay for a refrigerator for somebody. So you want to just be super clear and put it in your contract. And we've adjusted the verbiage on this one over the years to make sure that we don't get into that situation again. So that's it. It's a very simple contract. There's actually a lot of stuff packed in there, but super easy to understand. One page, very disarming for people. Number 11, additional items. So here is if there's anything extra, right? There's always something that somebody wants, like seller to take refrigerator before closing. Tenants own the appliances and they do not convey. Convey simply means it transfers at closing. So whatever those additional items are, that's where it would be. Seller to remain in property, have use of property for 72 hours after closing to move out, right? And again, whatever you agree to, you have to be upfront with your buyer so that they understand, because essentially these terms have to carry through to your other contract, which we will go over in just a minute. So that's pretty much it. Again, very simple. Here's how I would explain it to Mrs. Smith. Hey, Mrs. Smith, fantastic. Here's our contract. It's one page, very easy to understand. Let me go through it with you real quick. So this agreement, of course, here is the date. Right here, I've got your name. You're the owner of record. Here is me, and this can either be your name or your company's name. Description of the property, right? So we're at 123 Main Street in Chattanooga. This here, legal description, this is just the parcel number. This is what the actual tax ID is. This is probably what you would see on your tax bill that comes every year. Purchase price. So again, pretty simple. Here's what we've talked about. Here's what we've agreed to, that we are going to purchase the property from. Is that right? Yes. Perfect. All right. So here's what we do. I'm going to give you a copy of this when we leave. So if you can't get to sleep at night, you can read this and it'll probably put you right out, but I'll go through all of the highlights here. So again, closing costs, and I will circle this, right? If I'm in person, or if you're doing over the phone, this is why it's bolded to draw their attention to it. Buyer to pay for warranty deed, closing fees, and title insurance. So Mrs. Smith, I'm going to pay for everything on the transfer of the property. The only thing the state doesn't allow me to pay is back taxes. So If you've got back taxes or any liens or mortgages, of course, that will just come out of the amount you're going to pay at closing. The good news is you don't have to write a check to the title company. So they'll just deduct it. Isn't that cool? Yes, it is. Awesome. So same thing, taxes are prorated at closing. So, I'll pay taxes from the date I buy it, and you're responsible for anything when you owned it. Closing to be set as soon as possible, but no later than 60 days. We talked quite a bit about this, how to explain that. Mrs. Smith, our goal is to close as quick as possible, and we normally close in about 37 days because title companies are backed up with refis right now. But sometimes it's quicker, and our goal is to get in here just as fast as we can and get this done. Of course, you're selling a property as is. There is, I'm not going to come back and ask you to do any kind of repairs or anything like that. Closing is going to be held at, we close here with Key Title in Chattanooga. They're right downtown. Feel free to give them a call, and they can answer any questions you got on the closing process. But we will stay in contact with you the whole way. The only thing we ask for is that we get the property with clear title, Mrs. Smith, so that, down the road, if we fix it up or need to sell it or refinance it or get a loan on it, of course we can do that, right? So that makes sense. The property is rented, so we'll just need to get within the next couple of days copies of the leases and, any other agreements that you've got that we will be taking over for. I just need to review all of that with my partner and make sure that is all good, but I'm sure it's exactly what you told me it was when we talked the first time. We will need to, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take some pictures today, Mrs. Smith. And what I'll do is I'll get those to my contractors. And, chances are before closing, I'll need to get them in here once or twice just to, get some estimates on that bathroom floor or see what it's going to take to cost me to tear out this kitchen. I'll get them in and out as quick as I can. I'll give you plenty of notice, and I won't just have somebody knocking on your door, but, hopefully it's okay. I'll get them in here so that the day we close, we are ready to go and do everything that we need to do on our end. So, that's it. And if the property is vacant, I tell them, hey, I need to get a copy of the key, because what we're going to do is we're going to send our contractors over here to get some quotes on putting this new roof on, taking this tree off the roof or, replacing this, the bathroom, whatever it is, right? And we'll put that in a secure lockbox on the door. And, if you say it like it's something that's very normal, then it's very normal. And if there's any pushback, say, even if you had sold with a realtor, this is very standard stuff. Of course, we're going to have to come by and look at it before we close. Again, the sometimes pushback is, oh, I'll be happy to meet you here. Cool. And again, you never want to say like, no, because then they're going to get all freaked out. Yeah, absolutely. Here's the thing that's happened before. And, sellers like you that want to do that, and that's cool. I'm perfectly okay with that. But if you've ever dealt with contractors, none of them ever show up when they're supposed to. And I had a seller get upset with me one time because the contractor was supposed to be there at 2:00 and didn't show up till almost 7. So I just didn't want you to, to have to stand around and wait. If it makes you more comfortable, I can hold on to the key instead of putting it in a lockbox, and I'll make sure that I'm here every time. So that's it. That's how you deal with that. Then I'll go down to just to confirm, Mrs. Smith, there's no liens or anything. The county isn't going to knock this down or anything the day after I buy it, right? No. Okay, perfect. Cool. And then just, make sure before you move out or before we have closing that everything you want is out of the property, because I'll bring my guys in here the day after closing, and they'll start throwing things away. So I don't want you to think you can come back a week later and that dresser will still be here, because chances are it won't. Does all of that make sense? Perfect, Mrs. Smith. Let's go ahead and you can sign right here and date it. And then let me write in here your email and your phone number so that the title company has it, because they will probably, need to get a hold of you. They'll definitely need to get a hold of you before closing. And I will sign this. And that is it. That's how you go through it. So if I'm going in person, I always bring 2 copies. I make them sign a copy, me sign a copy. If you only have 1 copy and they want a copy, I will take I've got a PDF editor on my phone. I will take a photo of it and I can email it to them. If they really want the hard copy, I'll take a PDF of it and I will send that to myself and let them have the paper copy. That's fine. As long as you have a copy of the executed contract, you are good. So that is your buying contract with the seller of record. So that's pretty much it. I know it took us 30 minutes to explain that, but But that's everything that you need to know. So let's go on to your buying contract.